All right, so I hope you've had some fun trying to navigate within Maya using all of our different view options, but we're going to actually do some modeling now. So we're going to create a primitive object, which this is kind of the basis of every 3D model, is you build a primitive object, which means like a sphere, a cube, a cylinder, things like that, and you build out from there. So it's kind of the opposite of like marble, where, whenever you're sculpting in marble, you have this huge block of marble and you carve away at it and carve away at it until you're left with, your figure or whatever in the center of the marble. In this case, we're going to start with almost like a ball of clay that we're going to keep adding to and adding to and adding to and pulling out and extruding from. So we always start with a primitive object. I'm going to start with a cube in this case, so I'm going to simply click the polygon cube button, and it's going to plop a cube in the middle of the screen. This grid system, by the way, is really irrelevant to our purposes. It's basically used to give you some perspective, some alignment. For more complicated things, you'll use the grid, but in this case, this is just an aesthetic grid. This grid has no real meaning in the modeling of our project, okay? Same thing with the scale of the objects. The scale of the objects is going to change whenever we move to Unity, which is our game engine, so it doesn't really matter too much for what we're doing in this class. If you get later into like character modeling and doing things like that, then yes, the scale will matter, so pay attention to it. But for now, this is just really basic modeling. So I have my object here and I have it selected. Remember, if it's not highlighted in green, it's not selected. So I have it selected, and on the left-hand side, I have all of these different tools, but we're going to exclusively work in keyboard shortcuts for this portion of the class. So I like to rest my forefingers, not my thumb, but my other fingers, on Q, W, E, R. So just on that top row of keys, and then my thumb on the space bar. I like to have my thumb on the space bar so I can quickly tap into my multiple views, as we showed in the last video. So those Q, W, E, R are really your basic bread and butter in this class. Q is your selection tool, which is what we currently have. So Q is this first option right here, and that's just going to help us select things. W is the move tool. So I've tapped W, and I have this object selected. I'm going to just rotate my view around so you can see it. And what we get are these arrows, this sort of yellow cube in the middle, these other colored squares, and these are all different things that we can modify. So if I grab this arrow, if I click and drag this arrow, it's going to move my cube along the Z axis. And by the way, if you ever get confused, down here in the bottom left-hand corner is a little YZX, and it changes as you move around, so you can see the different directions. So this blue arrow, which is now yellow because it's selected, is my Z axis. This red arrow, which now is changed to yellow because it's selected, is my X axis. And this Y is this green is my Y axis. So as I select the different axi, it changes the color of them. These squares also operate like this. So these squares are planar movements. So this is going to move along these two, but not along our Z. So if I grab this square, I can move it along that line, but it's not going to move on the blue. Same with the red one. If I grab the red square, it's going to move along the other lines, but not the red line. And lastly, the green square does the same thing. So those are kind of like, hey, move, but not along this. The center square, this center square, is a free move. I would recommend that you never use this because this is based on the camera's position. So as I move this around, whenever I rotate the camera, it might be in a completely different spot than I was intending it to be in. Let's hit that, let's try and hit this center target with this middle selection. It's very tricky. And even then, I didn't really get what I wanted, which I wanted it to be down here, kind of like this, right? It's very tricky to use the center, so only use these side ones. So this is object manipulation, and we can pull in multiple objects. I can click the sphere, and now I have my sphere in there, and I can move that around. And just like we did in the last video, we can hit delete to delete those. Command Z or Control Z on Windows undoes things, so I can always undo different things. So I'm moving my object around, and that's the W key. So Q goes back to my selection key, W goes to my movement key. Let's hit E and have a selection. This is our rotation tool. So with W is our move, E is our rotation. Notice the colors are the same. So we have the blue, which will rotate our object using the Z-axis as its pivot point. This will rotate it using the Y-axis as its pivot point, and this will rotate using the X-axis as its pivot point. This larger circle is a free rotate. It's just like the other one. Don't use it. That's my recommendation. You can also grab this circle here and try and do it. It's just not great, not very accurate. So the rotation, this is a local-based rotation right now, and I might show you how to do some global rotations later, but it's rotating based on the object itself. So as I move this over, this Y is talking about the local Y of the object itself, not the world Y, which would be, this whole area. So keep that in mind as you move around your object. So W is move, E is rotate, and the last one of our tools is R. R is scale. And again, it uses exactly the same type of tool. This is called a gizmo, by the way, the red, blue, green object. What this lets us do is scale along these different axes. So if I grab this and pull it, it scales along the X. This will scale along the Y, and this will scale along the Y, and this will scale along the Z. Sorry, I got those flip-flopped. If I grab these two, it'll scale only along those, so it'll make it wider but not any taller, and so on and so forth. So you can play around with this. If you want the whole thing to be scaled independently, you would grab the middle. And in this one, you do use the middle one quite a bit because oftentimes you're scaling just from the center. So that's QWER. QWER. All right. That's really our basic tool. I want to show you one other thing before we move on to the next video, and that's holding down right-click on an object. So you'll notice the right-click key does a lot of different things within Maya. If you just tap right-click, it doesn't really do anything at all. If you hold down right-click, it's a context-sensitive tool based on what you have your mouse over. So if you have it over just the blank area and I hold down right-click, I have Complete Tool, which is just a simple tool, or Select All, which will select everything in the scene. I'm going to hit Q just to go back to my selection tool, and let's hold down our right-click over an object. Whenever we do that, we have a ton of options that appear. You're not going to use really any of this stuff down here, at least for this part of the class, but you will use this wheel. And you need to be very deliberate with it because it's easy to mess this wheel up. Right now we're in object mode, so I'm holding down right-click and I move my mouse over here and release, and now I'm in object mode. Object mode means that I select whole objects, just like this cube, or what was formerly a cube. Now it's just a kind of a simple polygon. If I hold down that right click and instead of object mode I go to face and then release, now I'm selecting different faces of my cube. And notice those faces have the same QWER tools as the others. So I could grab just this face and move it up, just this face and move that one in and out, or change it. I could also just scale that face. Now you're seeing some of the more powerful aspects of modeling and what we can do with it. Okay, I can also rotate these faces. Start to get something kind of architectural. Let's hold down right click. So that was object mode. That's our basic mode. And then we have face mode. Vertex, which a vertex is a point in space. We have a vocabulary list you can look at. But a vertex is essentially a corner. That's how you can think of it for now. And it has the same options. And then we have the edge, which can select a whole edge and move that around. Really powerful. But I usually want to return back to object mode just to have my basic object so I can move it around. So what I'd like you to do now is take a few minutes and generate some objects and start playing with them in this space using those QWER tools and the right-click object, face, vertex, and edge tools. So using those tools, let's see what you can make. You can probably arrange and create some pretty cool stuff.